want to welcome everybody for one, whoever is going to be
Yeah,
listening to this.
welcome to the first episode.
It's going to be a pretty exciting journey. I mean, it's going to be pretty cool to see everybody come together for sure, and
Yeah,
definitely going to be able to see how everybody grows together through this.
yeah.
So sweet.
So, first things first, what is Moment Makers Podcast?
Yeah, for sure. I would say Moments Makers podcast. Me and you both have just decided to collab. It's essentially hearing people's stories about dealing with any mental illness or pretty much just coming together and sharing our experiences as well as knowledge so that we can strengthen each other up. And it's an amazing podcast that we can share our stories and basically just hear information to strengthen each other and to gain more knowledge and exposure on these issues that are at hand in society today. So
Yeah,
definitely
for
that
sure.
first
So,
four.
like, the collab you're talking about is your brand Love Shout, and or not really brand, but you're kind of a brand. It's not like a clothing brand or anything, but it's like a lifestyle personality kind of thing.
Yeah.
um, that you do, and then my brand Spero Cloth. Um, you posted a video on Facebook, I think it was last week, um,
Hmm.
about how you're wanting to get back into mental illness. You or like the kind of conversation of mental illness, um, and you've recently went to school, and you're brushing back up on a lot of the stuff that you learned in school about the mental health field and all of those things.
Yep.
Um, and Sparrow, the kind of goal behind it, or the kind of idea behind what it is at its core, is a brand of hope. So Sparrow is spelled Spero,
Hmm.
and what that is it's hope in Latin. So the initial idea was to bring awareness to hope, and it's kind of morphed and changed. I started it back in 2013, but I've never really done anything outside of just making clothes for my friends and like smaller things.
Yeah.
Uh, but when you posted that video, I thought it matched up really well with the Sparrow mindset and the Sparrow kind of mission statement. That mission statement being makers of the moment. So we kind of collabed together and used that tagline as the Moment Makers podcast, which I feel fits really well with what we're trying to do. We're trying to shed light um, on the issue of mental illness, kind of take away that stigma that
Yeah.
is attached to it. I mean, you posted something on Facebook yesterday that said people are dying because they're too afraid to talk about mental illness, because they're too afraid that rumors or something are going to get spread about them, which
Yeah.
I think is really true. People are really afraid to talk about mental illness and kind of be labeled as depressive or anxious or whatever it is.
Hmm.
So that's kind of what we're doing, is opening up that conversation, making it so that um, people have that outlet to talk, to have a community of people that are going through the same things, um, to ultimately come to a conversation about the issue, to
Yeah. Exactly.
come through it in whatever way that is. Um, like my own life, I've used fitness and health and diet and nutrition to help with a lot of the depressive and anxious feelings that I've felt in the past. And I know you're big into fitness as well, and I think that's one thing that we've kind of bonded over, is the fitness and health aspect of mental illness, and kind of using that as a tool. So
Oh yeah, for sure, man. I mean, when you really look back on everything that pretty much the society has created this stigma for mental illness, it's actually quite sad. You know, you look at movies that, like the typical high school movies. You see kids that the student that's struggling and having depression, and like you as a viewer of the movie can see the backstory of what's going on with that person in the film. And like, let's say for instance, like they're having trouble at home, but then they have to go to school, and they're carrying that load throughout their
Mm-hmm.
classes. And then of course you had those groups of people that that'll sit there and make fun of them. Why? Because they're sitting there quiet, they're awkward, but you never know what's going on in their heads.
Yeah.
It's not just like everybody's just awkwardly antisocial. You never know, they could be having a really rough upbringing. They could have lost a family member, or the parents got divorced, or you never know the situation. And that's something that I really want to bring to light, because so many people are struggling with so many different things in life, but there isn't a sense of unity within the community. And the problem is that because of that insensitivity or that unawareness, it pretty much alienates those people. So like, when we're going through these things and like we're dealing with these things at home, the worst thing to feel is alone. So
Mm.
that's what usually drives people into darker depths of depression, because they feel alienated. So they don't know that they have any support. And even if they have like their family or anything like that, it's a mindset that can still be very dangerous, because then you can become blind to the support that you do have. And
Yeah.
hopefully within these future podcasts, I would like to get more into different strategies and different approaches on how to help cope with it personally, but then also as somebody from the outside coming in to help and support and learn how to properly do it. Because you know, at one spectrum, we have those people that are very insensitive, or try to ignore it because society will say, oh, it's they're just depressed and just want attention, or whatever the case may be. But obviously that is very inaccurate. There's a lot of different things that could go into that. I mean, like I said, dealing with any type of life or family issues, or a death in the family, or even just genetics. Some people are actually born with a chemical imbalance, which actually can throw off their whole serotonin levels and their endorphin levels entirely. And it's not even like they're really experiencing anything, but they just wake up one day and they just feel like crap. So
Yeah.
just try,
And
try to
more
bring that
on that
exposure.
too. Sorry.
Mhm.
More on that too is, so like my side of it is the perspective of diet is medicine.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of today's processed foods, and we can go more into this in another episode where we can talk about the science of it. But a lot of the foods that people are eating are also a factor in why there's so many more rates of depression and anxiety, so many higher rates of suicide, and a lot of it has to do with what we're putting in our body.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and we can go more into that in an episode of the podcast, but that's kind of where my perspective stems from, is the diet and nutrition side, because I think that that's the first place of attack and defense,
Mm.
um, is to target what you're eating, figure out what factors might be triggering a response to your external factors, what's happening in your life, what people are in your life, all those things.
Yeah.
Um, that's just a tool in the arsenal that we're going to kind of delve into over the course of this podcast, of what people are doing to help with those things. So,
Yeah, for sure, man. And I guess to add more on that as well is that I would love to go further into explaining different types of anxieties. I believe that a lot of people kind of generalize anxiety as like one, basically like a really high stress level, when in actuality, there are definitely different types of
yeah,
anxiety. So definitely want to go over that in another podcast. Because I actually been studying under Coach Craig Kenneth. He's actually a psychotherapist. He does have a lot of videos on YouTube as well, but also actually looked into some of his workbooks, and it does make a lot of sense because he does a lot of research based on basically like survival instinct that's embedded in our psychology. So
mm,
he basically comes at it from both of a scientific but also a more realistic kind of common sense way. I like the way that he blends it together.
Cool.
Um, and essentially, just want to be able to tackle this because a lot of people really do think that it's something that we can control or something that we can easily get over. But you're talking about decades. Depending on the age, it could be a child or even a grown adult, but it could be decades worth of internal programming that causes either a fight or flight response. So a similar situation will cause the same fight or flight response, and it's essentially what a panic attack is. You end up reacting to a situation that you may have experienced in the past that has caused severe
Mm,
trauma, and to avoid that pain, which is in essence pain is associated with death, it triggers the fight or flight response. So then at that point is when you either you can have a panic attack because of adrenaline rush, and then you end up having these rapid palpitations and respiration,
hmm
or you go into a complete shutdown. There is such a thing as broken heart syndrome. I
hmm
personally have experienced it where your body just biologically gives up. Like, for instance, like with me, dealing with a couple of things that I've been through, which I wouldn't mind sharing my backstory in another podcast. Just to kind of
Yeah.
give background. Uh, because of that whole situation, I actually had irregular heartbeat, which caused a decrease in volume with the blood being pumped through my system. So it
Mm.
actually caused my body to react as if I was having a heart attack. And
Wow.
yeah, and then because of that, I was hospitalized for 5 days straight in the cardiac center. So it was pretty scary. And then after that, I had a heart monitor on me for about 3 months. So it's definitely something that is very very real. It's
Well, and
not something
it's something that
that's like
you don't.
emotional.
It's something that a lot of people don't know about. Like me and you just doing this right now, I just now learned about that. Like I didn't know that was a thing. And I
Mm.
remember you going to the hospital. For whatever reason, I don't know if I was just busy at the time or what, but I remember you going to the hospital, but I don't remember that being the reason for it. Or I guess it might not have came up. I don't know what. I mean, that was a couple years ago. So
Yeah.
um, I don't remember what was going on, but I didn't realize that's what it was for. Um, so even just having this conversation right now is shedding some light on the stigma of what anxiety is, you know? And
Yeah.
I think that's what we're going to try and do with this podcast is grow it into something where it's a community of people that can talk about what they're going through, find tools to go through it together, and the end goal is to come out on the other side better for it. And I think going into, like you said, the different types of anxiety in detail, kind of why the body reacts that way, would be really cool.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so,
Yeah, and then I guess you can say like from all my experiences, is I'd say both. It's a blessing and a curse, because between getting the schooling to properly understand everything, but then also experiencing it firsthand, it's a very eye opening experience.
yeah.
It's like, man, when you're put in that position yourself, you begin to realize the limited resources and the limited support that's out there. And, even working in the field as a mental health professional, it really opened my eyes to the issue of the government actually supporting this program. I mean,
hmm
honestly, with trying to work there, it was like insane. We were understaffed, we were underpaid, and not that money is like the main factor, but if you really want
Well, I
to,
mean, you have to have money to run a business. It
yeah,
doesn't
exactly,
matter if that business is to help people, you have to have money.
yeah,
So,
exactly, and if you really want the passionate people to like focus wholeheartedly their lives on it, then you have to be able to cover their bills and their responsibilities.
and I think that mental health is one that the government kind of overlooks. They look at everything else as being a priority when you have more people that die from suicide every year. Um, you know the the fact that anxiety and depression are at the levels they are now is insane.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that goes hand in hand, that there's not a lot of resources. And then I go back to diet being a huge factor in that. And then, of course, plastics and all these other chemicals that were around constantly that
Yep.
affect us as people. You can talk about global warming and all that, whatever, whether or not you believe in it, your body's affected by everything around you, your diet,
Yeah.
your exercise level, the what you're eating out of, if it's plastic, if it's glass, um, and then the people that you're around. And I think there's different things that you can control in your life to help
Hmm.
change where you're at, because all anxiety and depression is a reaction. um, that's giving a very simplified perspective of what it is, but it's what it is at its core, is a reaction. It doesn't happen. I guess it can happen out of nowhere, but it's a reaction, and of that reaction, it's how you react to the anxiety that can determine where it goes.
Yeah.
Whether or not you have a full blown panic attack, or you can recognize those kind of markers of what's going on and shut it down before it becomes something bigger.
Exactly. So essentially, yeah. I mean, you pretty much hit it on the head. I guess like one thing I wanted to point out is like you were saying that it comes out of nowhere, and I believe with that, it's all like perspective, because like for anybody else that's not really experiencing it, obviously they're gonna be like, oh well, it's just they're freaking out for nothing, or they're I don't know why they're stressing out over this, or they shouldn't be worrying about it. And like with that mentality is, I feel like a hindrance. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, like in order to fully grasp um, how somebody is feeling in the moment when they're having an anxiety attack or dealing with anxiety, it's just understanding and accepting that they have anxiety. You don't really have to know why it's happening. You just need to understand that it's happening. You
Yeah,
know,
and know what it is that's happening.
exactly. So like I feel like definitely in that whole statement, knowledge is power. It really is power in this moment because especially for me personally, once I figured out what was going on, why I was having panic attacks, why I was going to hospital, it helped me target what the root issue was, and I was able to handle it in a better, more efficient way. Not to say that it's still a battle. I want to point that out that you can get professional help, and I always encourage people to get professional help. There's nothing wrong with that. It changed my life, and I always tell people, don't let your pride stop you from healing. Don't let it stop you from being able to grow and to free yourself from anxiety. Um, and when I say free yourself, it's not that it's just going to disappear. It
Yeah,
it will always be there because it ends up being part of our survival instincts. But being able to have the freedom to self-soothe yourself so that you don't have to go into full throttle anxiety and have a complete breakdown, and you
yeah,
can actually have a better quality of life.
and kind of going from that, you're gonna have good days and bad days.
Exactly.
And like we've mentioned, those days are going to be determined by the external factors and choices that you make throughout the day.
Yep.
Um, like for me, my current state of anxiety is that it kind of it displays itself as frustration.
Hmm.
Like I get really overwhelmed and frustrated, and I just kind of shut down and get upset for no reason. Um, like me and my wife will have a fight for no reason, and it's because my anxiety or whatever's going on with me is projecting itself as frustration, and I'm taking it out on her. And
Yeah.
for me, a big factor in that is my inflammation. I've got chronic back issues, arthritis in my lower back, and that when that's inflamed, it makes it very hard to be in a good mood. So I've noticed that with my diet, changing certain things in my diet and eating this and not eating that helps my mood change. And it helps me, one, acknowledge when I'm having those moments of frustration and anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
making a note of that and telling my wife, hey, this is what's going on. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to stop. And it's helped us have less of those moments. Um, and I think it's a constant battle with yourself to figure out what it is that's affecting you. Because like
Yeah.
I said, it's a reaction. So my reaction to my back pain is frustration, getting overwhelmed, shutting down, and being mean.
Mm-hmm.
So realizing what you're reacting to, why that thing's happening, and fixing things in that moment to know what it is, what's causing that reaction, can help you overcome it. Not, I don't know. I'm hesitant to say that you're gonna beat it because it's always going to be a part of you. And I think that you're going to deal with different levels and stages and types of anxiety your whole
Yeah.
life. It's just the world we live in now. But it's using the tools that you learned from the last panic attack that you had and building from that and noticing when it happens in a different form and kind of building on that your entire life. Um, and finding tools that help with certain aspects of that anxiety
Yeah.
and growing from that.
Yeah, I mean, and essentially, it's like building a trade. So, like, you're building a skill. So, like, example for me, my triggers I've learned over the past couple of years, is that my anxiety stems from separation or rejection. And like a lot of people label that, I was like, oh, he just wants attention, he's just needy and all this stuff. And like, you have no idea how many times I've gotten that. And you know it's tough to be able to explain to people because like I said, the society's exposure on it is just not there. It's pretty
Mm-hmm.
insufficient. So when I was actually, this is something that I've actually reflected back on. When I talked to my therapist, um, she said this actually stemmed from way back when I was like not even a year old. So
Wow.
it's not even something that I had a choice on or anything like that. It was completely subconscious. So it was like, as children, we are actually programmed to basically freak out when we're not by our parents. And you can tell because like what happens when a child needs something, or they feel like they lost their parents. They
Mm-hmm.
scream, they cry, right?
Yep.
So that is actually an instinctual survival technique, and that's what actually gives birth to like our base form of anxiety. It's a trigger that tells us to cry out for help, and then
Mm-hmm.
that essentially starts our bonding skills. We end up bonding with our parents because otherwise we're gonna die. As simple as that. And a baby that's basically ignored or neglected is not gonna survive. So we make our presence known. We freak out. We go into flight response, and our parents respond. And it's on the type of response from our parents that determine the type of anxiety that we get. When you get parents that basically soothe you all the time, they coddle you, they stay with you the whole time. Those are the parents that end up raising a child that has separation anxiety because
Mm-hmm.
that child didn't learn how to self-soothe properly. And then when it comes down to any type of separation experience later on in life, they start freaking out because they don't know how to self-soothe. They don't realize like, oh, I can be okay by myself and like I'll be all right, you know. Uh, and then another major form is avoidant type of anxiety. And the avoidant one is where the parents really didn't engage too much when a child was in distress. They just did kind of like the bare minimum, and then they really didn't get too much attention even throughout the rest of their social life. So, in that point, they realized that even if they need help, if they were to rely on somebody, that they feel like they'll just be disappointed or neglected. So those are the people that, like, to put in more relative term, it's like the people that are tough to get into a committed relationship because they have like trust issues, or they're just scared to get close to somebody. And the reason being is because it goes back. It goes back to their childhood where they were neglected as a child in one form or another. It doesn't necessarily have to be like as a baby if they needed their diaper change or anything like that. It may have just been a significant moment, like as a child, that they really needed their parents or they really needed a friend or something, and they just weren't there for them. And that aspect, that's what stuck with them, and that's what developed their avoidance style of anxiety.
But that's what's so crazy with the two things that you just mentioned was one, the parent was too there, like too
Yeah,
much involved, and then the polar opposite, the parent was not involved enough. So
yeah,
that's what's crazy, and having two kids of my own now, finding that balance is really hard. So the balance of being there when they need you, but not being there when they really don't, and letting them kind of build those skills.
mm-hmm.
Um, so that's what's crazy is that there's two polar opposite reactions to things in your life as you grow up that stem from your parent either being too involved or not being involved enough.
Yeah. You
That's just crazy to think about.
Yeah, and, it's kind of funny because like when I learned this, I just kind of busted out laughing because my mom has a video of me as a kid, and like we were actually in Florida with the entire family and like my cousins and everything, and my mom wanted to go on the go karts because we were at an arcade, and man, in the video, all you hear is me screaming at the top of my lungs. I may have been like 1 year old at the time, so I was like screaming my head off, and my mom was getting frustrated because she's already in the go kart, but she was about to go, but then she just stopped and like she just came back over and didn't even get to have fun for herself because I was still freaking out. And like, when I talked about this with my therapist, she was just like, "Yep, you've had high levels of anxiety since you were a baby." And if my mom were to have not coddled me in those moments, eventually I would have calmed down and realized that I would have been okay.
Yeah.
And I believe like the balance is something that is still being learned, even still to this day. Many therapists I know have recommended, like when it comes to serious issues, if a child you can tell is really emotionally distraught or
Hmm.
physically harmed, or they really need something, of course you be there, you show the support. But let's say like they just didn't get their way. If they just didn't get their way and they're freaking out or whatever, you just basically you have to tell them like it's okay to not get your way all the time, and it's okay um, to not be coddled all the time. And like one thing that I saw my sister do, which I really applaud her for, is like my nephew always hurts himself, always.
Hmm.
He's jumping off of stuff. He's a typical little boy, and when he gets hurt, but he's not hurt too bad, she basically just like reminds him like you're okay, you're fine. She processes with him to help himself soothe. So instead of your typical kiss the boo boo, hold them until they stop crying, stuff like
Yeah.
that, she basically tells him you're fine, you're not bleeding. Relax, take a deep breath, and literally he takes his deep breaths, and he's fine. And that's a practice of learning to self soothe. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, when you really think about it, when they tell us to go try yoga or meditation, what do they tell us? Take deep breaths.
Hmm.
And if you can learn that as a child, man, that'll help you. You know,
Yeah.
and and I do believe that really hasn't been very popular, especially in our generation, because back then they didn't really have too much exposure on these types of issues and these type of
Well, and
upbringing.
I think the internet is a huge factor in both the benefit of the conversation and then a cause of the anxiety and the issues. So
Yeah,
that's another kind of thing that people didn't have 20, 30 years ago is the internet and the capacity that it is now to research anything and to have your friends right there at the click of a button, to have a computer in your pocket at all times.
Yeah.
And again, it's a benefit and a curse of mental illness, because you have all these resources and tools and things at your fingertips, but you also have the causation of a lot of people's anxiety and the vanity and the uh, comparing yourself to other people and what they're doing in their life. And I think that's a big factor in a lot of people's anxiety, and kind of where it stems from, especially kids that are 10, 11, 12 now. It's kind of molding them into who they are.
Yep. Exactly, bro. And you know, I guess you can say that, and I feel like this is like another factor to a lot of the issues happening today is like you said, like the internet is something that it's like an amazing tool. But I also think that it's also alienating human interaction. You know, when you're actually with somebody in person, uh, you're actually engaging in multiple levels of communication, and
Mm-hmm.
through that, you're also gaining more of awareness. You're learning how to read people, and that stems from body language, eye contact, vocal tone, vocal volume. Different things
Mm-hmm.
that will reflect off of somebody. And if somebody's going through a struggle, you'll be able to read it. But
Yeah.
you'll be able to read it is if you are consistent in building those communication skills and seeing those red flags. So like
Mm-hmm.
part of my job when I was a mental health professional was I had to look out for those red flags. We didn't just call our clients; we visited them in their homes. We took them
Mm-hmm.
out, and through those experiences, we learned what their weaknesses were as far as things that they needed to work on to strengthen up, whether it's social skills or like hygiene or whatever the case may be, because a lot of these things are affected on because of their mental health.
Yeah.
And then like part of those red flags was are they uncomfortable giving you eye contact? Are they more in a reserved posture? Is their back more hunched? Are they kind of more closed off? Are they pretty much looking like they're about to go into a fetal position? Because in that manner, that's when they're anxious. That's when they're are they sitting still or are they moving around? Are they
Mm-hmm.
diverting the conversation? Are they kind of fidgeting? Are they just anything, any little thing?
Yeah.
I have one client that he had a he had a habit of twitching his thumbs together whenever he started
Mm-hmm.
getting. You can look at his entire body; he looks relaxed, but if that finger's twitching, he's having anxiety. And it's just those little things. Like me personally, I notice I rub my hands together a lot. My hands get sweaty as all hell, and then I start to like stammer a lot. Like I stutter so much, and like
Mm-hmm.
that's when I'm starting to get nervous. That's when my anxiety, kind of spikes up. And it was kind of interesting to hear that you said that your anxiety is, kind of reflected off of frustration. And I believe mine is too. Um, I kind of use the kind of like the illustration of the lion and the mouse, where the lion
Okay.
is the splinter,
Yeah.
and everybody's scared to go to the lion, because they're freaking out like, oh crap, he's roaring, screaming, and all this stuff. But little do they know that he's actually hurting,
Yeah.
and between me and you, people like us, our biggest thing that we need to work on is communication, and then, like you were saying, you were talking with Tristan, your wife, about how you reflect off that frustration through the anxiety, and the best way to do it is to acknowledge it and communicate. Take a step back, try and calm down, and talk about it later. And
Yeah.
my issue, I got a double, you can say like a double-edged sword, because I have that type of anxiety, but then I also have the separation anxiety. So most people may be okay with like walking away and being like, okay, we'll talk about it later after I calm down. Me, I'm like, oh crap, I'm having anxiety attack, but then stay close to me and talk to me like right now, but it doesn't really help the situation.
Yeah. And I
so
I think I had a lot of that separation anxiety when I was younger, like in my later teens.
Mhm.
Um, but I feel like I took a year and a half and kind of worked on myself and um, got a lot of my diet in check and got into lifting and I think that helped me overcome that aspect of anxiety.
Yeah,
Um, I still deal with it from time to time, but I think that, and of course, me being married now, helps a lot with that because me and my wife love each other, and there's I don't have to worry about that
yeah,
anymore. But I think having a lot more self confidence, getting into better shape, and lifting and doing those things helped me kind of get to a place where I wasn't worried about separation anymore.
yeah,
Um, and I think I took about 2 years off of dieting, off of the gym, and I know I can tell that the anxieties come back, and it's displayed itself in a different way, and that's frustration, and that's fighting, and it's anger, and I don't like it. So I've taken steps to get back into the routine that I was in, so that I
hmm
can be more confident and self assured in myself and feel better in myself. So
yeah. And like that's one thing is to be to have to deal with this type of anxiety and also be in a relationship is very difficult. I mean,
yeah,
you have to have somebody that's very patient, very understanding, and is supportive. Because we're people like us with anxiety, we're gonna forget sometimes like what really helped us. In
oh,
those
and
moments.
it's hard too. It's
Yeah,
hard too when your partner has anxiety. So you
yeah,
both have different types of anxiety, and those feed off of each other. And when I wasn't able to acknowledge when I was going through a panic attack, her
mm,
anxiety would flare up because she didn't want to deal with fighting, and it would escalate. So now
yeah,
that we can, and she's worked a lot on her own, and having two kids changes a lot with women and the way that they behave and kind of see themselves, and that's an anxiety in itself as well. So there's all these levels of anxiety, and they all feed off of each other, and being in a relationship, being in a partnership, and living together, and being together all the time, and all those anxieties feeding off of each other, it's hard.
yeah. Honestly, it is. I mean, I've been in relationships where my anxiety would cause some issues, and the woman I was with, her anxiety was the avoidant type. So like
Yeah,
my neediness or my need for support and understanding, she could not comprehend because she basically was just like, I'm not gonna baby you, and you know it's that would actually just cause more anxiety,
yeah,
because and the thing is that it's even proven studies, that an avoidant type of person, like an avoidant anxiety type of person, they're not gonna be able to really look beyond their own mentality. Because why? Because they were avoidant. They would close themselves off, so then they close themselves off to other perspectives. So like,
mm-hmm.
when you get somebody that is separation anxiety, me personally, I'm a type where I will talk to people. I will try and reach out because I don't like to try and figure things out by myself, because I know that I am just going to sit there and I'm going to overthink, and I'm just going to be sitting
Yeah,
there pretty much in a black hole and not really find a way out.
mm-hmm.
And when it comes to an avoiding person, they're the exact opposite. They feel more comfortable being alone. They feel more comfortable not
Yeah,
having people know their business and get all up in it and all that stuff. But the only drawback to that is that it stops their growth. It basically stops them from being open minded and seeing, where they can understand something a little bit differently, or basically, and it's also limiting on their relationships. Most people that are avoidant don't have a ton of long lasting relationships. Either that, or they don't really have too many friends. Most of people that I know, friends and ex girlfriends, that had those types of anxieties, the avoidance style, they actually you would always tell me, like, they don't know why, they don't have too many friends, or they didn't understand why they just couldn't handle being in a relationship or anything like that. And a lot of it stemmed from that type of anxiety. It's a tough thing. So, like, for to basically sum it up, people with separation anxiety like me, we have a struggle with having self confidence and self reassurance. So our goal is to constantly self reflect, to instill strength within ourselves, build our communication skills so that we can calmly talk about the needs that we may have and be able to compromise so we can have a healthy communication and have a
Mm-hmm.
healthy bond with others. And then on the other hand, with the people that are avoidant, they have to be able to let down their walls. They have to understand that in order to move on from things, in order to really prosper in life, they have to be able to take the time to connect with others, to trust people, and to put down that wall of paranoia that people are gonna let them down. Because in all reality, you and I both know, like, and everybody else knows, nobody's perfect. We're all gonna mess up, right? I mean,
Yep.
but the healthy mentality of it is that we're human. You know,
Yeah.
we all have grown up differently. So we're all going to have different types of communications, different types of anxieties, different types of expectations. And the only way that you can really grow with somebody, connect with somebody, for instance, like best friends, you know, my best friend Justin, him and I have been friends since freshman year of high school. So I was back in like 2008 that we've known each other. No, actually, I think it was freshman year or sophomore year. I mean, because I think he came in sophomore year at my high school, St. Rita, and that's when we became friends. But we got really close in college. But throughout that whole span, we had our ups and downs. We had days where we didn't talk to each other because something
Mm-hmm.
pissed us off, or life just got busy. But it was just an understanding that it's not something that was personal against each other. It was just like a moment, and
Yeah.
we need to understand that we both had our best interests for each other, and then like we had that unconditional brotherly love that allowed us to maintain the relationship that we have. And the same thing goes with our family. That's why I feel like a lot of people have these really unrealistic expectations when it comes to relationships, because you got to think of it this way. A romantic relationship should basically reflect the same way that you have your family relationship and your best friend relationship. You get into it with your family. You get into it with your best friends. You guys get pissed off with each other. You guys communicate later on. You guys heal from that, and you guys actually grow together closer.
Yeah.
And that is what's essential. And I feel like nowadays people and society encourage this whole mentality of, oh, if you're just not happy, then just leave, or if it's just like, if it's too hard, then just leave. And like the divorce rates are at an all-time high right now, and marriage rates have dropped by half in just the past 10 years. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe that that's part of the reason, between the lack of you know personal interaction, which subconsciously helps build those communication skills,
Yeah.
as well as just not understanding that life is going to throw obstacles, and we're all dealing with something. So we just got to be
Yeah.
sensitive to the other person.
Yeah.
So I know, like, for me, eventually I'll find somebody. Uh, you know, we'll see what happens. But for people like with my type of separation anxiety, in order to have a successful relationship, we have to be able to self reflect. We have to be able to self soothe, and we have to be able to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, because I guess you can say, like, the last, like, major point I'll say on this is that I learned from the psychotherapist from Craig Kenneth, that when we have our panic attacks, we become very self-absorbed, and the only reason being is because we've gotten back to our basic instinctual roots of the fight or flight response. We're trying to survive.
Yeah.
We feel like we're in danger, so we're not taking into consideration where the other person is coming from in that moment. We're just
Yeah.
we're just freaking out and trying to survive.
Yeah.
And it's not until we self-soothe, take a step back, and look at the situation and be like, oh, okay, well, I may have been wrong in this situation, or hey, you know what? It's something that I shouldn't be worrying about. But if it is something that is uh, necessary to address later on with your partner, you just got to make sure that you have your anxiety in check so that you can talk clearly, have your thoughts together, and you're not basically talking out of fear, but you're talking out of objective thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
mean,
for sure.
yeah. So I mean, how do you feel like um, you get through all your stuff with your wife? Like, I know you guys mentioned that, like, you have your frustrations and you guys talk and all that. So, I guess from personal experience, what do you feel like has basically helped you the most?
Acknowledging when things are happening out of anxiety and trying to stop having that conversation in that moment and kind of take a second to think about what's going on. Basically, just stopping what we're doing and acknowledging that we're acting out of anxiety.
Oh, perfect. Okay,
So,
that's actually really good. Yeah, because I've learned from personal experience, if you try and address the topic at hand, let's say like freaking going out somewhere, or choosing what's for dinner, or you just had like a
yeah,
bad day or something, right? I think that's a healthy way to address it, because if you're sitting there trying to keep on talking about what's going on in the moment, then and not addressing the root issue, which is the reaction issue at the moment,
yeah,
then you're not going to get anywhere. And
yeah.
I've
And like you said, like no one's perfect and we have bad days and good days, but what's helped us the most is acknowledging when that's happening and trying to stop the conversation that we're having or move past in that conversation with a different tone. So, and I think
yeah.
that's a good place to stop there, just so we don't go too long for the first episode. It is probably going to be a longer form podcast, so um, people will need to get used to it being a probably 45-minute to an hour long show.
Oh.
So, but I think there's a lot of good information just in that first episode. A lot of stuff that we're definitely going to dive into a lot deeper, and I definitely think that there's a need for this. So I'm excited to do more and to get some episodes recorded and to get stuff out there so people can kind of latch on to what they like about it, and we can get some feedback and see how we can improve. Obviously, there's going to be some growing pains and kind of figuring out what we're doing,
Oh
how
yeah.
we're doing it, and getting comfortable. But I think for a first episode, this is really awesome. So
Yeah, definitely, bro. I definitely forward to it. I mean, there's gonna be so much to touch base on, and definitely getting feedback from everybody else. If anybody has any specific questions that they want us to cover, or if they just want to know a little bit more about something specific, they can just let us know, and we'll definitely be able to cover it in another episode.
yeah, and we'll plug all of our like Facebook, Instagrams, all of that stuff for the podcast and for us personally, where you guys can kind of follow the journey. So,
Yeah, sure.
well, that's gonna wrap it up. Cool. I'm excited.
All right, man. Well, we'll be seeing you guys in the next episode, and we'll continue this growth, right?
Absolutely.
All right, man. Let's get it going and keep these moment makers going.
For sure.
All right, you have a good one.
You too, man.
All right, bye.